Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
You know, we all have different aspects to our lives. I was just responding to somebody on LinkedIn and they were like, hey, you've really got an impressive career and blah, blah, blah. It's like, you know what? I've never really thought of myself having a career because I worked for somebody for 6 years and then I went self-employed. I've been self-employed almost 6 years. And most of the people I know are self-employed. They have their own businesses. But then I know there's a whole nother world out there. And it's actually a bigger world, really, of people who are in careers. And, you know, they network, they have their own hangups, but they still network and still need to do all the things that they need to do. So today I'm interviewing, or I never interview, I talk to people. Gretchen Skalka. Did I get that right?
You did, yeah.
All right, thank you. She's a career and personal leadership development strategist, and she's the owner of Career Insights, there's an S there, consulting. So welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I guess, how did you jump into this line of work? I assume you had a career.
I did. And actually, I did this. I did career strategy and coaching alongside my career for more than a decade. So I sort of fell into it. In 2009, I was working for a company that went through a leadership change. And one of the things that the new leadership decided to do straight away was to outsource an entire department. And it was a pretty integral department. So in that outsourcing, there were a lot of people that I knew personally who were going to be affected. And so I volunteered to help them do some job search strategy. There were people at that company who'd been there since high school. Like they'd never looked for a job. They went to work there because their dad worked there, or their brother worked there, something like that. And so they had no idea how to do it and they were panicked. And I had been working online for a long time. I started working online in 96 for a sports internet startup. So I had been online before most people actually were. So I had a good understanding of how to navigate and find things. So I started doing that. And that led to the conversations with people of, okay, now how do I talk to people about that? A big part of what they would say is, I don't know what to do. I've only ever done bills of lading for Grenada, right? Well, okay, that's working with another government. That's regulatory, that's compliance. There's a lot of things in there that you've had to do, not to mention customer service. You've probably done some project management, coordinating like cargo loads and things like that. So let's look at that. So that sort of tangential career pathing became part of the career strategy that I help people work through. That sort of getting out of your, like, thinking broader in terms of, it's not that I've only done this. That's what it was called. Mm-hmm. But you did all of this. So let's look at that. Where are your skills?
Yeah.
So skill mining became something that I got pretty good at and started helping people with. And so it was all word of mouth. It was, oh, you helped my friend Rachel, with her stuff. Can you help me? This is what I'm looking at. And that grew into I was at that company, and then I moved to another one where I had a larger leadership role. I was a marketing director, and I had a team of about 24 that I created and who reported to me. So there was also career development that went into that. Well, I had leaders from other departments who would come to me, and, we were friends, but frustrated that things weren't happening in their careers that they felt should have by then. So that became like a new area of working with people in terms of expectation management, communication skills, self-command, all those things that we have to do, but we don't really think about doing. And so a long way of answering your question is, I've been coaching and doing strategy since 2009. But last year in 2022, I thought, well, let's see if I can do this full time. So I've been a business owner a very short amount of time, but I've been doing this for 14 years now, I guess it is. So a long time.
Well, I think that's an important distinction to draw, because I've had those conversations with people as well. And what the metaphor or analogy, I can't get those two straight. It doesn't matter. People get my point. Imagine the plumber that works for the big plumbing company for years and then decides to go out on his own. He's got a truck, he's got all the tools. He's not telling people, I don't have any clients, because he's unclogged toilets till the cows come home. I mean, he just right, or whatever they do. And he's got those things, and we tend to forget that we're really doing those sorts of things anyway.
Absolutely. I can remember having a conversation. I mentor a couple of coaches, and I had a conversation with one, and she's a performance coach. So she does physical performance coaching. Mm-hmm. And at one point she was really struggling with her business, and she was like, I don't have any clients. And I said, well, okay, who are you're teaching now? Well, I'm doing a class at a gym, but they're not my clients. And I said, whoa. I don't look like it right now, but I've been to the gym, and I would sign up for certain classes because I knew I liked the person who was teaching it. I knew I was going to get something more out of it. I said, they're not coming just to do they're coming for you, for the motivation that you bring to them. I said, you are coaching people through that class. Don't discount what you're doing, that activity, that experience that you've got right now. And it's one of the things I think a lot of people when they're in their careers, they tend to not apply that to themselves, that experience that they're gaining for themselves, because they're doing a service or a job for another entity. They're still doing that, and they're still benefiting from that more than their physical compensation. So I think that's also another important distinction to make when it comes to that.
Why do you think we get myopic like that?
I think it's just the way we look at the world of work. We look at the world of work in sort of a tit for tat, us and them kind of thing. It's a transactional relationship, a wholly transactional relationship. So if it's transactional, I give you something, I get something. But that whole I'm getting something along the way sometimes gets lost. We think of upskilling as something that we're going to do outside of the world of work. But everything we're doing every day is helping to bolster a skill we have and grow it or not. And so communication is a big one. It's one of the most important skills I think anyone can have. And I think it's also one of the most misunderstood. And the way you communicate anything determines if it's even absorbed, heard, or understood or not. And you can stop it before you ever say the first word, just by body language or a physical cue. So that's really important to understand. And it's certainly something that I think causes a lot of challenge in the workplace for people. And I'm not a psychologist, psychiatrist, or any sort of a tryst or whatever. I think part of the change, and my wife has worked for the same, well, we met at the firm I was at, and then she took a job with Fortune 500 company and has been there through lots of changes, but still there 30 years later. And we have these conversations all the time. And she's in compensation, executive compensation. So she's kind of on the forefront of, okay, this person's being let go. And she didn't really give me names, but just saying, okay, this senior VP or whatever, this is happening. And I really feel bad for them. And it's like, that's tough. They're going to get a good severance package. But when you're working for somebody, when you're self-employed, you get kicked in the gut all the time. I mean, you've only been doing it a short time. I'm sure you've had your share of disappointments, right? And you have to deal with that. Yes.
But when you're working for a company, there are disappointments. But outside of, hey, your services are no longer needed anymore, those disappointments are always tempered in the notion that, well, in Friday's payday, I'll get money, right? And so you have that little attaboy going for you. And so I think when these people leave or in transition or looking for something, all of a sudden they're in that position of, oh my gosh, I could be rejected.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, it's, when I work with people, and I've worked with people who've been in that situation, And there's always that, well, I haven't, I don't even know how I'm going to go about this. And now I'm the one who has to go out seeking. And when you're a business owner, I mean, I basically look at every conversation that I might have with somebody who I believe I can help, but that's a job interview. And I have to be very respectful of the fact that, I have to be able to, have them be confident in the fact that I can help them, that I can give them value. Otherwise,
Yeah.
what's the point? And so I have to be, that has to be top of mind for me. They have to be my priority, not the business part of it, but they do. Otherwise, there is nothing. And I think for executives, that can be a real challenge, because it's sort of a, it peels a couple of layers of insulation back, and you have to get back down to, what do you have to offer? Not what you've been doing here, the role you've had, what you're known for there. What do you have to offer people who don't know you beyond a piece of paper or a LinkedIn profile? And how do you articulate that? How good are you at communicating that, at advocating for yourself? And that's an area that I work on a lot, because there are a lot of people who are high performing, like they're very successful people who are really not very good at articulating what it is they do and what value they bring to someone else. And a lot of that can be attributed to the fact that they may have been in a role for a lengthy amount of time. So they've not had to do that, certainly not very recently. And so when you get back into that, that's when you sort of uncover all the things that might've been standing in their way of doing that all along. And that can be a really cathartic experience for a lot of people. It's a good one, certainly, but not one that most people go into, willingly. They just sort of find themselves there. Yeah.
Yeah. I recorded an episode of my podcast a couple weeks ago on, I forget the exact title I gave it, but basically here are types of communications you need to avoid. And the two that I tell them to avoid when looking for referrals, again, I'm talking to small business people for the most part, but people who are in transition or out there in the career world, is we have a level of communication that we get into at the office,
Mm-hmm.
right? When you work for somebody, there was a system. You log into the system and you do this, and there's nowhere else on the planet that uses that exact system. Maybe that's not entirely true, but it was tinkered to meet those needs. And
Absolutely.
so somebody who's been at a company for a long time, they talk at this very high level, not in an academic sense, but just a different sort of a language.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see where that would be a real challenge for people coming out. And you shouldn't talk it. You shouldn't describe it that way. Not that it's misogynist or racist or anything. It's just nobody knows what you're saying. And that's a huge problem with self-employed people.
I think we can get way too inside baseball, right? For a lot of people, where we have our own shorthand and our own words.
Yes. Yeah.
And every business has them, every business has them. I worked for a company that they were a cargo carrier. And I had to do a glossary when I went to work there. I had to create my own, because they had so many acronyms and little names for things. But there was one that I thought, wow, I really want to know what that is. And they had a framed picture in the lobby, and it said FCNs, on time, every time. And I was like, wow, that must be a really important thing. And what I learned was the FCN that they were bragging about was on time, every time, was a freight correction notice, which is a mistake, which is you get a government fine for making that. Why would you frame that and say on time, every time, which was the company motto? That did not make sense to me. Mm-hmm. And that, again, is something that if you don't know what that means, that can be very misleading. Come to find out, knowing what it meant was extremely problematic for me, because I'm trying to understand why that would be something that you would do. But a lot of companies do that. And you're right, as small business owners, we do it too, where we sort of have this shorthand that we've adapted for ourselves. And it's something we've called something for a long time that nobody else knows about. I worked for a company that had a system access request form. If you needed anything, you had to get a system access request form, except nobody called it that. They called it a SARF. So I needed to know, how do I do something? And everyone's like, I just do a SARF for it. You got a SARF for it. Got a SARF for it. What is that? How do I do that? And you'll have people who will be very hesitant to ask, because it's sort of communicate in a way that, well, you should know that it's SARF. Everybody knows it.
Yeah.
But they don't. And so that also is something that style of communication can absolutely inhibit somebody's growth, because it can stop them in their tracks from even asking the question, because the way it was communicated is, well, of course, you know this, but you don't. Yeah.
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 Well, and I can see that hurting somebody once they move on to something else.
Yes.
You know, I know this, but I don't know how to, I don't know what other people call it. And they're not saying that, but that's probably going on in their head.
Yeah.
You know, this company's looking for this, and I've never done this. Well, you have.
Yes. I've had that conversation with people too. It's like there was actually a client that I had, and she brought me a job description, and she said, I can do this job. Great. What's the challenge? What's standing in your way there? Well, I've never done that job. I was like, hang on.
Yeah.
I can do this job and I've never done that job. Don't make sense in the same, like, two sentences following each other. Everything that's in the job description, I know you can do, but I've never been called that. Okay. That's what we're talking about. You've never had that title attributed to what you've done. So what? Do you fit the bill? Then apply for the job. You know, but again, it's that sort of, and a lot of times those titles can be a function of, you know, a company like Mercer might come in and do an audit of what people are doing and will assign certain titles based on, you know, compensation levels in certain areas and that kind of thing. And that's great. Those are fine. Sometimes companies will make up their own. I mean, 5 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, you didn't have rock star, ninja, and unicorn everywhere that we have now. And so those words, they sound cool, but they don't mean anything.
No.
So what is it that you're actually looking for? You know, I've never been called a ninja in any job I've had, but I know those skills, you know, for that particular role, and it probably means expert or something like that. But it's also along the same lines that, you know, 10, 15 years ago, customer service was what that role was called. Then it was customer support. Then it was customer excellence, but now it's customer experience. And so it's still the same, it has the same roots.
Right.
But if you're not, you know, if you're not speaking that language, you may not think that you're a match for that. And so I totally, absolutely 100% understand where you're coming from with that. Yeah.
Well, and there's the other situation where somebody, thinking of this conversation the other day, they went from being a VP to being just a VP of finance to just being a controller. Well, they were a VP of finance in a really, really small company. You know, it's like him and his wife, right? I mean, it's not that bad, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And also you go to a big company, it's like, well, that's great, you know, pat him on the head. Here you're just this, you know.
Absolutely. That's another thing that I think presents a lot of challenges for people, is that we get as human beings too caught up in what we're called for the, you know, 8 hours or whatever amount of time during the day that we do the function instead of the function itself. And so when people go to look for something else, if they find themselves back in the job market of their own accord or not, they tend to look for apples to apples. Well, this is what I was called, so that's what I have to be called at the next one, instead of what did I do? And there are a whole host of opportunities that can be missed entirely by them because they're not looking for what they would be doing. They're looking for what they might be called. And you'll have people, and ego will come into play. Well, I can't take that job because I've been at this level. And there are a lot of reasons you might have been, you know, when I started my company, I could have called myself the grand poobah of the known world. And that could be my title. I could be queen of the known universe. I could be CEO. I go by the function that I provide, right? Which is personal leadership development, career strategy. What do you do? You know, because again, you're not going to be doing a title all day. You could be incredibly unhappy if you don't get very clear on what it is that you're going to be doing. What value are you going to be bringing? Not only could you be very unhappy, but so will they. Yeah. So, you know, that title tends to be a huge barrier for a lot of people that I don't think they truly recognize until they're in a new situation and they brought expectation from what everything was wrapped up under that title before. And it's not that way because it's a different environment. It's a different company. And their idea of what that means to be a controller or a VP or something could be very, very different. So I think all those parameters are incredibly important.
Yeah. Maybe a touchy subject, but do you find that there's a difference between how men and women approach these things? And I'm dealing with very small sample sizes, but I talked to a woman, she was looking at a job and she's like, wow, I can do about 3/5 of that. Whereas a guy would look at a guy who's probably less experienced than her would look at that same job and say, I'll do it. I don't care.
Yeah.
But that's just, I was sharing it with somebody as well. That's how men and women are different. I'm like, okay, but that's just a small sample size.
It is true though. It is one of the ways. And if you hear my dog, I do
That's okay.
apologize.
This is a podcast. We're good with all of it.
Yeah. But that is one of the ways that men and women are different, and it does bear out in a larger size. Now, not all men and women, of course,
Sure.
You're going to have people who are not, but by and large, yes, I do find that men are a lot more ready and willing and to raise a hand and say, I'm going to go for that. Whereas women will want to check off every box and say, well, I don't have all of that, so maybe I won't be considered. And some of that is because in some companies they won't be, and some they will. So there is some of that. There's also an expectation and there's a certain mentality that goes along with that. But I do think that's a very good understanding because it does bear out. And there's also, that also goes along age lines too, where you'll have, women who are younger will tend to be, they'll just discount it entirely. And then they'll also deprioritize. Well, it didn't mean that much to me anyway. And then you'll have women who are at a different age, like my age, for example, who will become the end all be all. And not only is it that, it's a reflection of them as a human being. I must not be X, Y, and Z because they didn't consider me for A, B, and C, that kind of thing. And we have to work on that too, because that's an understanding in here, not out there. And that's an interpretation. And that's also a form of communication. That's what we're telling ourselves about something that has happened or is happening right now external to us. A lot of times that is misinformation. That's that whole perception versus reality, where we create narratives. We just do it naturally. Human beings, we like to fill gaps. And so in the absence of information, we create our own reality. We devise narratives to explain things that we can't explain.
Right.
And so it's the reason why, if you've ever texted anyone that took a little bit of time to get back to you, or maybe didn't get back to you, and you might have wondered, are they mad at me? Did I say something that upset them? Instead of, they didn't get back to me. Who knows why? I don't need to know why. I just know but we all do that. And then that can go into much bigger things. I've given the example of, if you're in a meeting with someone, you're in a meeting, you're presenting, and you look down and at the board table and there's someone who's on their phone. And your immediate reaction is probably, that's rude, inappropriate, unprofessional. But what if that person just got a 911 text from their child's school?
Right.
Does that change your understanding, your perception of what just happened? That's important, because we don't always follow up on those to ask what happened.
Yeah.
And so we don't have that information. So we will create a narrative, and then the next, and that we attach it to that person, that event. And we remember that. So the next time we see that person in a meeting, we immediately have a thought and a feeling about them.
Yeah.
That's a form of communication we do to ourselves. And those grow over time, and they get entrenched, and we believe them to be true over time. And why that's important is because what we believe to be right, true, real, possible, those are the things that we take action on, good or bad. And that action becomes what does become our reality.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, it's widely reported that we judge others in a black and white, a scale of black and white. Oh, they were late. They were late, and ourselves in shades of gray. I was late, but
right. Right. We have all the context for ourselves.
Right. We do.
Yeah.
We do.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we all just need to learn to take a deep breath and say, okay, there's,
there are factors at play we don't know. And there are factors at play that we don't need to know. That's also really, really tough to do, but it takes a little bit of time, but it is achievable. Absolutely. But it's something that I work on it all the time. I've been doing that particular mindset work for years. Since 2014. Yeah. It's a long time. So you constantly work on it, because you don't know.
It's a subconscious. It's your mind is lightning fast. And all right, Gretchen, let's shift gears here. I want to talk about career insights consulting. Types of work you do. We've been talking about a lot of it already, certainly, but types of people you're looking to work with. Someone listening out there, hey, I should call because of this, or
most of the people that I work with are going to be mid to senior level professionals who are experiencing some sort of career challenge, and that can run the gamut. And I say career because a lot of times what happens is there's a life challenge that's presented itself, but it's manifesting in the career. So an external frustration, again, we are what we do and we do what we are. And so all those things blend together. And so it will impact your career. And going back to the creating false narratives, I've worked with people who their career challenge is they have not gotten the promotion that they applied for, like once, twice. They're ready to walk out the door on a tenured position that they're good at because they haven't asked the question. They don't understand what's going on. They're just frustrated. And so there's that lack of self-command. And now we have to figure out what actually happened. So I work with people who are at that basically mid to senior level in their professional career, and they're facing some sort of challenge that they just can't get past. And I work with them to determine their part in it. And then all the actual real external factors at play. Every now and then, it is not the usual, but every now and then we actually will invite other people. Sometimes I've had one one boss who was invited into a session to really get very clear on what was happening. And that was a game changer for that particular client. So I do one-on-one work. I do group. I also do leadership coaching. And with that, the majority of the clients I see there, it's business, are people who have inherited a team. There's been some sort of organizational change and they've come in or been moved into a different role or been elevated into a role where the team is already assembled. It's not one that they chose or put together. And now they're coming in to lead it. And what we find there is that the challenge is the team. They have ideas before they've met the new leadership. They have thoughts, and generally nobody likes change. Change, we all think is like, unless we have a hand in making it happen, it makes us very nervous, fearful, and we don't like it. And so it's a matter of really breaking all of those preconceptions down and dealing with what is in this moment, and then trying to rebuild relationships from there. That is a tough one because you're dealing with multiple personalities, many people, a lot of expectations and things of that nature. And you also tend to have a finite schedule to do that in. But that is the bulk of what I do. I do also some public speaking, but mostly what I do is going to be the one-to-one and group coaching.
It seems to me that things are more complicated than ever. There was a time where you kind of moved up in seniority, and it was all really kind of an age sort of a thing. Now it's like you get the young kid out of college who's just got technology abilities that you just haven't been. I can't keep up with my kids, right? I mean, they just, and it's scary. It's not really scary. I'm self-employed, but I could see it being scary for someone just saying, you know what, I have been here. I have institutional knowledge, but things are happening around me that are just, I can't keep up with. So,
and I think that's something too, that, you have to have a deft approach to handle that, because there's also a lot of psychology that goes along with that. There's that sort of legacy expectation that a lot of us were raised with, that this is what the world of work is. You spend a certain amount of time, then you move here, certain amount of time, you move here. And there's that, sort of, experience reward ladder that you're moving along. And what we find now is that is not the case anymore in most companies. It's not the case at all. So we have that sort of legacy belief and expectation that based on time and age, we have a certain position in the society, in sort of the, the cosmos of this environment. And that's not always the case. Then what we have to do is we have to sort of reverse engineer that and figure out what that looks like. And it's all about communication relationships. So you have legacy institutional knowledge. That is gold for a company. It's incredibly important because you're the one who's going to have that knowledge of, we tried this before, and here's where we weren't able to make that work. Instead of, we tried that before, it didn't work. Because that sounds dismissive, instead of, I remember when we tried that, we had some challenges with that. And let me walk you through that. That's a partner. That's somebody who's got information that I want to crack into and get more of. So that is your approach. That's your communication style. So let's work on that. But to work on that, we have to get to why we're defensive. That's a defensive mode. Well, we tried that before, it didn't work. It's dismissive and it's defensive. Now we have to understand why that is. And it's because you're someone who's got the job that I should have at this point in my career.
Right.
You're probably making the money that I should be making at this point in my career. I don't like you. I have feelings about you. You may be my boss on paper, but I'm never going to give you the respect you deserve. You are now shortening the lifespan that you have in that company because you're not seen as somebody who could be a partner for that person. So help make yourself a partner. That's a hard one because there's ego, everything's at play there. Your entire sense of yourself is at play there. And so everybody has to be involved. That new leadership has to be incredibly understanding and deferential to the fact that this is someone's life. You're coming in and you have to understand their position in all of this, how they're feeling about it. Servant leadership is a term that a lot of people use, and I think a lot of people don't actually fully understand, because two of the cornerstones of servant leadership are listening and empathy. That's incredibly important. So I have to automatically try to understand from your point of view how you see me, right?
Yep.
What can I do that can make that easier for you so that this transition goes smoothly for everybody? Let's try that. And so, so that you don't get into that position of, we tried that before, it didn't work. The new leadership makes everybody their partner first. Don't make it incumbent upon the people who've been there. You're the change. Help them through it. That's important. Yeah. Doesn't always happen, but
no,
that would be the goal.
It's complicated. It's all very, very complicated. Well, Gretchen, thank you very much for being on the program. Best way to get a hold of you is through your LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, I'm on all the time. It's just LinkedIn and then / Gretchen Scalca. And then my website is kind of a mouthful, careerinsightsconsulting.com. So I usually just send people over to my LinkedIn. Yeah, it's all there.
Sounds great. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AMSPIRIT.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.